And there are a lot of areas in here that actually aren't going to be accessible in the game, but I put them in there anyway because they exist within the world. And so not only would that help to make the world seem really detailed and full, but then there could be areas where even if you don't go there, the player might recognize that area and just get excited about the fact that we included it in there. One of my other primary objectives for this game was to create a lot of the initial concept artwork for the environments as well as the characters. So for instance, a lot of the areas will have a lot of cliffs all over the place, and so one of the things that I had to do was design the cliffs. Just like when I was working with the world map, I had a limitation that I had to deal with, but it's a little bit more strict with the environment. I would have to make sure that the graphics that I've made are going to be able to be used in a interesting fashion, in lots of different combinations, and also in lots of different terrains. Because cliffs could show up in the forest, cliffs can show up in the desert, cliffs can show up anywhere. They might have snow on the cliffs. So, for instance, I would make this initial painting, and this painting is a really high-resolution version of these cliffs. And I just tried to get as many different kinds of cliff angles and lighting and all of the different important things that would go into the artwork of the cliff, all in one big piece. That was then given to Murray, and Murray, his job was to then, in this case, was to then take that cliff that I had made and make all these different versions of it. So here, the cliff has been broken up into pieces, and those pieces can be repeated over and over again to make taller cliffs or longer cliffs, or just cliffs that are a lot more complicated and not flat looking. And we'd have cliffs that have grass tops, and we have cliffs that have a dark bottom and cliffs that have a light bottom. And if I'm going to piece together an interesting cliff from some of these pieces of the cliff, I could take this piece. Let's see here, I'll start a new image. And I'll grab a bunch of these cliffs. I'm gonna make a cliff out of this. So if I'm gonna make an interesting cliff, I can grab this centerpiece and repeat it over and over again. Okay, now I want an angle on the side. So I just stick it down. Now I've suddenly got some angles. If I want to continue the straight side across again, I can just grab one of these side pieces and plop it right next to it, and it's done. This is tile-based level design, and the whole point is that we're creating tiles that will easily connect with each other to look like it's no longer made of tiles, so that we can do a lot of the work up front in creating the artwork, and then later on all we have to do is be creative about how they're placed down, and we don't have to worry about whether or not it's going to look right. And that speeds up a lot of the creation process of making the levels, and it allows us to make a lot more unique levels in a shorter amount of time than would have otherwise been necessary.
When we're thinking about how we're going to translate the story from the series into the game, a lot of editing takes place, a lot of video watching takes place. Jerry Swanson was responsible for creating both original dialogue and taking this dialogue from the show and editing it down into something that will work well with our game. There's a lot of reading in this game. We wanted to cover the story as well as we could, but the dialogue from the show, obviously there's a lot of talking, and it has to get cut down into something that players can understand and will help the game move along at a good pace. So that was a real challenge right there.
The show has a lot of dialogue, so it's not something that we can fit in a video game, and also we can't have any voice acting in this game, so we have to have it all going through text, and we can't expect the player to be reading just page after page after page, considering it breaks up the flow of the game. We try to get the dialogue down to its basic core, and we want it to be as short as possible, but at the same time we want it to have all the character of the original dialogue, and we wanted to have all the details that are necessary to get the story across. One of the big things that we were trying to do was make it so that someone who has never watched Dragon Ball Z can get a sense of what the story is and who these characters are.
For the music of Legacy of Goku 2, we definitely wanted to take the approach, again, of being as true to the show as possible. We listened to a lot of music. Giannis Brown was our primary musician. Paul Carmody also did music for the game, and they both worked on sound effects. We were very careful to do a faithful translation of the show's music into something that will fit onto the Game Boy Advance cartridge and sound reasonably similar. It's tough to make really lush sounding music on the Game Boy Advance. I think they did a very good job in this case of translating those songs into something that sounds good on the Game Boy Advance.
For this game, our goal was to make it sound like the show, so Giannis and I both would listen to the music from the show extensively, and actually write it down note for note, and go from there. I mean, a lot of the cues on the show are maybe only like 30 seconds, so we have to turn that 30 seconds into, a 6-minute song. So that was the biggest challenge. But, like I said, the goal in this game was to really try to recreate the sounds of the show rather than just some generic video game music. We use a bank of samples that are made by ourselves. We would use a program like SoundForge just to make very short wave files and turn them into audio samples. They would sound all sorts of sounds. We have about 100 samples in this game. We managed to fit them all into a really small file size. So we had a huge library of sounds to work with. And then with Impulse Tracker, with this kind of specialized music called tracker music, you would write down the note value that you would want played. And you can, it specifies the instrument. You can also specify the volume that you want it played at, and panning and vibrato and some sliding and all this great stuff you can do with it. So he has a hi-hat track going on this here. The next one. It doesn't sound like much, but you play it all together. It actually fills up pretty nicely. Yeah, I mean, we couldn't possibly use CD audio because, let's say you had a 4-minute song. If you were playing a PlayStation 2 game, you did CD audio. It wouldn't matter. You got the whole disc to fit this thing because a 4-minute song is going to be over 40 megabytes. If it was an MP3, it'd be around 4 megabytes, which using a PC or something, that's good. But a GBA cartridge, they only have about a total, they usually average around 8 megabytes. So there's no way you're going to fit a 4 megabyte song in there. You'd use up all your space. So you got to find some way to really crunch things down, and tracker music is one of the most logical choices.
I'm very excited to be working on Legacy of Goku 2. I've watched Dragon Ball Z since the very beginning of the Saiyan saga with Vegeta. So being able to create a game based on this show that I've watched for years is just like a dream come true. It's really awesome.
It's been amazing working on this, to be such a large product, something that's so popular, and to actually be able to work on the Game Boy Advance and to make something like this on a computer and then play it on a Game Boy and see it in action is just amazing.
I was a Dragon Ball Z fan since it first started playing on Cartoon Network, and so being given the opportunity to have input into part of the Dragon Ball Z universe has been a real joy.
It is exciting because more people will hear this music than would ever hear the stuff I used to write in college and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, that was amazing. Now that you know how they make it, go out and play it, live it, and love it. I'll see you on Dragon Ball Z.